The bullet missed Katherine Garrison's head by 3 inches, and she didn't make a sound. That silence saved her life, because the man who fired the shot thought he'd missed his target entirely, turned tail, and rode off into the darkness of the Texas night before realizing the young woman he'd been aiming at was still standing there, frozen but alive, behind the wooden fence of her family's ranch just outside San Angelo. It was 1878, and Katherine had learned long ago that sometimes the best response to danger was no response at all. Her father found her there 10 minutes later, still standing in the same spot, her basket of eggs somehow still clutched in her hands, not a single one broken despite the near-death encounter. He'd heard the gunshot from the barn and came running, rifle in hand, ready to defend his only daughter. When he saw her standing there, unharmed but pale as moonlight, he wrapped his arms around her and felt her trembling. "Did you see who it was?" he asked, his voice rough with fear and anger. Katherine shook her head. She could have spoken, could have described the horse, the general build of the rider, the direction he'd fled. But the words felt stuck somewhere between her mind and her mouth, the way they so often did. Instead, she just shook her head and let her father lead her back to the house, where her mother would fuss over her, and her 3 older brothers would argue about riding out to find the shooter. In the kitchen, warmed by the cook stove and wrapped in her mother's shawl, Katherine finally found her voice. "He rode west," she said quietly. "Chestnut horse with a white blaze. Man wore a gray hat." Her eldest brother, Thomas, nodded and headed for the door, but their father stopped him. "Too dark now. We'll report it to the sheriff in the morning." That night, Katherine lay in her narrow bed and listened to her parents talking in the room below. The floorboards were old and sound carried. "She's too quiet, Joseph," her mother said, not for the first time. "How is a girl supposed to find a husband when she barely speaks?" "She speaks plenty when she has something to say," her father replied. "That's not enough. The Hendersons' daughter never stops talking, and she's already engaged. Katherine is 22 years old. People are starting to talk." "Let them talk. It's not just the silence, Joseph, it's the way she is. Sometimes she just stares off into nothing. People think she's strange." Katherine pulled her quilt over her head, blocking out the voices. She'd heard variations of this conversation her entire life. Too quiet, too strange, too different. The women in San Angelo whispered that she'd never make a good wife, that a man needed a woman who could entertain guests, who could fill a home with chatter and laughter. What man would want to come home to silence? The next morning, Sheriff Palmer came out to the ranch to take Katherine's statement. He was a patient man, well into his 50s, with a weathered face that had seen too much violence in his lifetime. He sat across from Katherine at the kitchen table and waited while she carefully described what she'd seen. "You're sure it was a chestnut horse?" he asked. Katherine nodded. "And the man, did you notice anything else about him?" She considered this, replaying the moment in her mind. "He sat crooked in the saddle, like his left side pained him." Sheriff Palmer made a note of this. "That's good detail, Miss Garrison, real good. Most folks are too scared to notice anything useful." Katherine didn't mention that she noticed everything all the time. It was part of why speaking felt so overwhelming. There was always too much to say, too many observations crowding her mind, and sorting through them to find the right words felt like trying to catch specific raindrops in a storm. 3 days later, a cowboy rode into San Angelo leading a chestnut horse with a white blaze. His name was Mason Turner, and he'd been tracking the horse and its rider for the better part of a week. The rider was a man named Jake Farley, wanted for a string of robberies and 1 murder up in Abilene. Mason had caught up with him 20 miles west of San Angelo, where Farley had been laid up in an abandoned line shack. nursing what turned out to be a bullet wound in his left shoulder from a botched robbery attempt. Mason brought Farley in draped over the saddle, dead from a shootout. When Sheriff Palmer asked what happened, Mason's explanation was brief and to the point. He drew first. I was faster. The sheriff examined the body, noted the old wound in Farley's shoulder that matched Katherine's description, and ruled it a justified shooting. He paid Mason the $50 bounty that had been on Farley's head and asked if he was planning to stick around San Angelo. Might, Mason said. Depends if there's work. The Garrison Ranch is always looking for good hands, the sheriff said. Especially now, after Farley took a shot at their daughter. They'd probably appreciate having someone around who knows how to handle trouble. That was how Mason Turner ended up at the Garrison Ranch on a warm September afternoon, his few possessions tied to his saddle, his hat dusty from the road. He was 26 years old, lean and tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that seemed to notice everything. When Joseph Garrison met him at the gate, Mason introduced himself without much fanfare. Sheriff Palmer said you might need hands, he said. Joseph looked him over. You're the one who brought in Jake Farley. Yes, sir. My daughter gave the description that helped identify him. She's got a good eye for detail. Mason nodded, filing this information away. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board, Joseph said. Bunkhouse is clean, food is good. We run cattle and horses. Work is honest and hard. That suits me fine, Mason said. Joseph extended his hand and they shook on it. As Mason was leading his horse toward the bunkhouse, Katherine emerged from the garden, a basket of vegetables balanced on her hip. She stopped when she saw the stranger, her dark eyes taking in every detail. Mason tipped his hat to her. Madam, he said. Katherine gave a small nod in return but didn't speak. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Mason felt something shift in the air between them, something he couldn't quite name. Then Katherine's mother called from the house, and the young woman turned and walked away, her long braids swinging against her back. That's Katherine, Joseph said, coming up beside Mason. My youngest, she's the one Farley shot at. Mason watched her disappear into the house. She seemed steady. She is, Joseph said, and there was pride in his voice. Too quiet for some folks' taste, but steady as they come. Over the following weeks, Mason settled into the rhythm of ranch life. He was a good worker, skilled with horses and cattle, and he had a calm way about him that the animals responded to. He didn't talk much, which suited the other ranch hands just fine. Most cowboys weren't particularly chatty anyway, and Mason's silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. He saw Katherine often, in passing. She helped her mother with the cooking and brought meals out to the workers. She tended the garden and the chickens. She rode out sometimes to check on the cattle in the near pastures, sitting her horse with easy grace. And she was always quiet. But Mason noticed that her quietness wasn't the same as having nothing to say. He watched the way her eyes tracked everything, the way she tilted her head slightly when she was listening, really listening to something. He saw her stop to observe a hawk circling overhead, standing motionless for 5 full minutes while she watched its hunting pattern. He saw her calm a spooked horse with nothing but her presence and one gentle hand on its neck. The other ranch hands talked about her sometimes, not unkindly but with a kind of puzzled acceptance. Sweet girl, one of them said. Shame she's so strange, probably never marry. Mason didn't comment, but the words bothered him more than he cared to admit. It was a month before he and Katherine had a real conversation. He'd been working on fixing a section of fence in the far pasture when his horse threw a shoe. Rather than ride the animal back and risk laming it, Mason led it on foot, a slow walk in the afternoon heat. He was halfway back to the barn when Katherine appeared, riding her painted mare. She pulled up beside him and dismounted without a word, then gestured to her horse. It took Mason a moment to understand the offer. "I can walk," he said. Katherine shook her head and pointed more insistently at the mare, then took his horse's reins from his hand. "You sure?" Mason asked. She nodded. He climbed into her saddle and they continued toward the ranch, moving slowly so his lame horse could keep pace. They didn't speak, but the silence felt natural, even pleasant. Mason found himself relaxing into it, enjoying the absence of the need to fill the air with words. When they reached the barn, Katherine helped him settle his horse in a stall and fetch the tools needed to check the hoof. She held the horse steady while Mason examined the problem, her presence calming the animal more effectively than any amount of soothing talk could have. "Thank you," Mason said when they were done. Katherine gave him a small smile, and it transformed her face, making her dark eyes light up. Then she slipped out of the barn, leaving Mason standing there wondering why his heart was beating faster. That evening, at dinner in the main house, Katherine's mother was holding court about the upcoming church social. The Garrisons always invited their ranch hands to eat with the family on Sundays, and Mason had quickly learned that Mrs. Eliza Garrison loved to talk. "Katherine, you'll need to prepare something to bring," Eliza said. "Perhaps your apple pie. Men do love a good pie, and it's important to show your skills." Katherine nodded slightly, her eyes on her plate. "And you must make an effort to socialize," Eliza continued. "I know it's difficult for you, dear, but you're not getting any younger. If you would just try to be more engaging, perhaps some of the young men would show interest." Mason watched a faint flush creep up Katherine's neck. Her father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The girl is fine as she is, Eliza," Joseph said. "Fine is not the same as married," Eliza replied. "People are already saying she's too quiet to be a wife. What kind of home can a woman make if she can't even hold a conversation?" Mason found himself speaking before he'd really thought about it. "Some men might prefer a peaceful home to a noisy one." The table went silent. Eliza turned to look at him, her eyebrows raised. "Mr. Turner, are you suggesting that a wife shouldn't speak to her husband?" "No, madam," Mason said carefully. "I'm suggesting that there's different kinds of communication. Words aren't always the most important kind." Katherine's eyes lifted to meet his across the table, and he saw surprise in them and something else, something that made his pulse quicken. "Well," Eliza said, clearly not sure how to respond, "that's a very unusual perspective." Joseph steered the conversation to safer topics, and the meal continued. But Mason was acutely aware of Katherine's presence, of the way she occasionally glanced in his direction when she thought he wasn't looking. After dinner, he stepped out onto the porch for some air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He'd been standing there for maybe 10 minutes when the door opened behind him, and Katherine emerged. She came to stand beside him at the railing, not too close, but close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender soap. They stood together in silence, watching the colors deepen and fade. "I meant what I said," Mason told her quietly, "about different kinds of communication." Katherine turned to look at him, a question in her eyes. "I've known plenty of people who talk all the time and never say anything worth hearing," he continued. "And I've known a few who choose their words carefully, make them count. You seem like the second kind." She considered this, then spoke in her soft voice. "Most people think I'm simple." "Because I'm quiet." "You're not simple," Mason said with certainty. "You notice everything. That's the opposite of simple." "How do you know?" "Because I notice things too," he said. "And I've been noticing you." The words hung in the air between them. Katherine's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look away. "I see how you watch the animals," Mason continued. "How you read the weather in the clouds, How you listen to people, really listen, even when they don't realize you're paying attention. That takes intelligence. My mother says a man wants a wife who can entertain him, Katherine said. Some men, maybe, Mason agreed. But I've spent most of my life around men who never stop talking, always trying to prove how clever they are. It's exhausting. Your silence is peaceful. Like clear water after drinking dust all day. Katherine smiled at the comparison, a real smile that reached her eyes. You're not like the other cowboys. How so? They're louder, more. She searched for the word. Restless, you're still. It was Mason's turn to smile. My mother used to say I was born old, too serious for a child. Where is she now? Your mother died when I was 15. Fever took her. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Mason leaned against the railing. My father went a year later, just sort of gave up without her. They were like two parts of the same whole, you know. He couldn't figure out how to be himself without her. Katherine nodded slowly. That's how it should be, I think. When two people marry, they should fit together like that. You believe in that kind of love? Mason asked. Even though people tell you you're too quiet to find it, she met his eyes directly. Especially because they tell me that. It means I won't settle for someone who needs me to be different. I'll wait for someone who likes me as I am. That's wise, Mason said softly, or stubborn. Maybe both. They smiled at each other and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky and Katherine pointed to it. Venus, she said. The first star isn't really a star at all. I know, Mason said. It's a planet. Most people don't know that. Most people don't look up enough to care. Katherine turned to face him fully. Why did you really come to San Angelo, Mason Turner? He appreciated that she used his full name, that she asked direct questions when she did speak. I'd been tracking Farley for 3 weeks. When I caught up with him and he was dead, I didn't have anywhere else to be. Figured I'd stay somewhere for a while. Put down roots, maybe. Do you like it here? I do, he said, and he realized it was true. I like the work. I like your family. He hesitated. I like that there are still things worth staying for. Katherine understood what he wasn't quite saying. She looked back out at the horizon where the last light was fading. I'm glad you stayed. Me too, Mason said. After that night, things shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but gradual, like the change of seasons. Mason found reasons to work near wherever Katherine was. If she was in the garden, he'd repair the nearby fence. If she was hanging laundry, he'd choose that time to check on the horses in the close paddock. They didn't always talk, but they were aware of each other, drawn together by something neither quite understood yet. The church social came and went. Katherine brought her apple pie, which was indeed excellent, and Mason made a point of being there, wearing his cleanest shirt and his least battered hat. He watched several young men approach Katherine throughout the evening, encouraged by their mothers, and he watched how uncomfortable she became, how she gave short answers and looked for escape routes. When one particularly persistent fellow backed her into a corner near the refreshment table, talking at her about his plans to expand his father's feed business, Mason intervened. "Pardon me," he said, stepping between them smoothly, "but I believe Miss Garrison promised me the next dance." Katherine's relief was palpable. The other man sputtered a protest, but Mason was already leading her away toward where couples were forming up for a reel. The music started, and they joined the line. Katherine wasn't much of a dancer, and neither was Mason, but they moved through the patterns well enough, touching hands briefly as the dance required, circling each other, coming together and apart. When it was over, Mason suggested they get some air. Outside, away from the noise and the crowd, Katherine took a deep breath. "Thank you. He wasn't listening to anything I said." "What were you saying?" "That I wasn't interested. that I needed to help with the food, that I'd promised someone else a dance. She looked up at him. That last part was a lie until you made it true. I couldn't watch him trap you like that, Mason said. You looked like a fox in a snare. That's exactly how it felt. Katherine wrapped her arms around herself, though the night wasn't cold. I don't understand why people think I need to change, why being quiet is such a terrible thing. It's not terrible at all, Mason said firmly. People are just uncomfortable with things they don't understand. They mistake quiet for empty, which is ignorant. You ever feel that way? Like the world is too loud and everyone expects you to add to the noise. All the time, Mason admitted. That's part of why I became a cowboy. Out on the range, nobody expects you to make conversation with the cattle. Katherine laughed, a soft sound that Mason realized he wanted to hear more often. That's why I like the horses. They don't mind that I'm quiet. Neither do I, Mason said. He stepped closer to her. Katherine, I want you to know something. Your silence doesn't bother me. It never has. When I'm around you, I feel like I can breathe easier, like I don't have to perform or pretend. I can just be myself. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern light from the church. I feel the same way around you. Yeah. Yes, like I don't have to apologize for who I am. Mason reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted, and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, warm and sure. I'm not good with words either, he said. But I want you to know that I think you're remarkable exactly as you are, and anyone who can't see that is a fool. Mason, Katherine whispered. I'm going to court you properly, he said. If that's all right with you, I'll speak to your father. Do this the right way. People will talk. They'll say you're making a mistake. Let them talk. I don't care what they say. Katherine squeezed his hand. Then yes, I'd like that very much. They stood there together in the quiet night, hands linked, understanding passing between them without need for more words. Inside the church, the music started up again, but neither of them moved to go back inside. This moment, this peaceful silence shared between two souls who understood each other, was worth more than all the dances and social graces in the world. The next morning, Mason approached Joseph Garrison in the barn. The older man was checking on a mare that was close to foaling, and he looked up when Mason entered. Mr. Garrison, I'd like to speak with you about something important, Mason said. Joseph straightened, reading the seriousness in Mason's tone. Go on. I'd like your permission to court your daughter. Joseph was quiet for a moment, studying Mason's face. Katherine. Yes, sir. You've only been here a few months. Long enough to know my own mind, Mason said, and long enough to see that she's a rare kind of woman. The kind worth waiting for, worth working for. People in town say she's too quiet, Joseph said, but there was something testing in his tone, like he was checking Mason's resolve. People in town say a lot of foolish things, Mason replied. Your daughter is thoughtful and observant and kind. She doesn't waste words, which I admire. The world has enough noise in it already. Joseph's stern expression softened into a smile. You sound like a man who's already made up his mind. I have, sir, but I wanted your blessing before I proceed. Does Katherine know about this? I told her last night that I intended to court her properly. She seemed amenable to the idea. Amenable, Joseph repeated, amusement in his voice. That's a careful way of putting it. He extended his hand to Mason. You have my blessing, son. Katherine's mother might have opinions about this, but I think you're exactly the kind of man my daughter needs. Someone who appreciates her for who she is. They shook hands, and Mason felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't quite realized he'd been carrying. Eliza Garrison did indeed have opinions. When Joseph told her that evening that Mason Turner was courting Katherine, her reaction was mixed. He's a cowboy, she said. A drifter. He has no property, no prospects beyond monthly wages. He's honest and hardworking, Joseph countered. And he sees Catherine's value. Any man can say sweet words. Mason Turner isn't much for sweet words, Eliza. That's part of why I trust him. He says what he means. Eliza pursed her lips. Katherine is 22 years old. I've been praying for her to find a husband, but I'd hoped for someone more established. Love doesn't always come in the package we expect, Joseph said gently. And I'd rather see our daughter with a good man who has little than a wealthy man who doesn't appreciate her. In the end, Eliza agreed to give Mason a chance, though she made it clear she'd be watching carefully to see how he treated Katherine. Mason didn't mind the scrutiny. He had nothing to hide and every intention of treating Katherine with the respect and care she deserved. The courting period that followed was unlike any romance the town of San Angelo had seen before. Mason and Katherine didn't attend many social events together. They didn't promenade through town or make public displays. Instead, their courtship was quiet, private, built on shared moments and growing understanding. Mason would finish his work and find Katherine in the garden, and they'd walk together through the rows of vegetables while she showed him what was growing. She taught him the names of plants, which ones needed more water, which ones the rabbits favored. He listened to every word, asked questions, remembered everything she told him. Katherine would come out to the corrals where Mason was training horses, and she'd sit on the fence and watch him work. Sometimes, she'd offer observations about an animal's behavior that helped him understand what the horse needed. Sometimes, she'd just sit in companionable silence, and Mason found that her presence made the work more enjoyable. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky. Mason would tell her stories about places he'd been, people he'd met during his years of drifting. Katherine would share her thoughts about the stars, the patterns she'd observed in weather and animal behavior, dreams she had for the future. "I'd like to have a library someday," she told him one evening. "A whole room filled with books. I love reading, but we only have a few books in the house." "What kind of books do you like?" Mason asked. "Natural history, poetry, stories about faraway places." She glanced at him. "What about you?" "I'm not much of a reader," he admitted. "Never had much opportunity for schooling, but I like when you tell me about the things you read. It's better than reading myself, hearing you explain it." Katherine blushed with pleasure. No one had ever made her feel like her interests were valuable before. As autumn deepened into winter, Mason saved every spare penny from his wages. He had a plan forming, a future he wanted to build, but it required money and time. He picked up extra work when he could, breaking horses for neighboring ranches, doing repair jobs in town on his days off. Katherine noticed, of course. She noticed everything about him. "You're working too hard," she told him one Sunday afternoon. "You'll wear yourself out." "I'm working towards something," he said. "Something important." "Can you tell me what?" Mason hesitated, then decided she deserved honesty. "I want to buy land. Nothing fancy, but a piece of property I can call my own. Build a house, start a small ranch. I've been saving for years and I'm almost there." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to have it secured before I talked about it," he explained. "I didn't want to make promises I might not be able to keep." Katherine reached for his hand. "I don't need a big ranch, Mason, or a fancy house. I know you don't. But I need to be able to provide for you properly. I won't ask you to marry me until I have something real to offer." "You already have something real to offer," she said softly. "Yourself." Mason pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She fit perfectly against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I love you, Katherine Garrison," he said quietly. "I've loved you since that first day when you offered me your horse without saying a word. Maybe even before that, when I saw you in the yard and felt like I'd been looking for you my whole life without knowing it." Katherine pulled back just enough to look up at his face. "I love you too. You're the first person who ever made me feel like I was enough, exactly as I am." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a promise of more to come. When they parted, both were smiling. "I'm still going to do this properly," Mason said. "I'm going to buy that land and build that house. But knowing you'll be there with me makes all the work worthwhile." Over the winter months, Mason's plan came together piece by piece. There was a parcel of land about 5 miles from the Garrison Ranch, 160 acres with a creek running through it and good grazing. The owner was an elderly man named Carl Morrison, who was moving east to live with his daughter. He was willing to sell for a fair price, and by February of 1879, Mason had saved enough for a down payment. The day he signed the papers in the land office, he rode straight back to the Garrison Ranch to tell Katherine. He found her in the kitchen, helping her mother prepare dinner. When he appeared in the doorway, his face alight with excitement, she knew immediately that something good had happened. "Can you step outside for a moment?" he asked. Katherine wiped her hands on her apron and followed him out to the porch. It was a cold afternoon, the wind sharp, but Mason's happiness was warm enough to ward off the chill. "I did it," he said. "The Morrison property is mine." "Ours if you'll have it." Katherine's hands flew to her mouth. "Mason, really, I signed the papers an hour ago." He pulled her into his arms, spinning her around. "We have land, Katherine. Good land with water and grass. It's going to take work to build it up, but it's ours." She was laughing, actually laughing out loud, and the sound was music to Mason's ears. When he set her down, she was breathless and beaming. "When can we see it?" she asked. "Right now, if you want. We have a couple hours of daylight left." They rode out together, Katherine on her painted mare and Mason on his gelding. The property was beautiful even in winter's grip. Rolling hills dotted with mesquite and oak trees, the creek running clear over smooth stones. There was an old line shack on the property, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was shelter. "We'll tear that down and build proper," Mason said, gesturing at the shack. "A real house with a big kitchen and a parlor, and a room for your library." Katherine turned to him with shining eyes. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me," he said. "Now, there's one more thing I need to do before we make any more plans." He dismounted and helped Katherine down from her horse, then took both her hands in his. The wind ruffled his dark hair, and the setting sun cast golden light across the land that was now theirs. "Katherine Ann Garrison," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You are the quietest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You see the world in ways other people miss, and you've taught me to see it that way too. You make silence feel like a gift instead of an absence. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life learning the language of your quietness, building a home where peace matters more than noise, raising a family with you. Will you marry me?" Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, I'll marry you." Mason pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple silver band with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I kept. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Katherine held out her hand, trembling slightly, and Mason slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She looked at it for a long moment, then threw her arms around Mason's neck and kissed him with all the passion that words could never fully express. When they finally returned to the Garrison Ranch that evening, everyone knew immediately what had happened. Katherine's face was radiant, and Mason couldn't stop smiling. Joseph shook Mason's hand and pulled him into a brief, hard hug. Eliza cried happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding. "We'll have it in the spring," she declared. "April, perhaps, when the wildflowers are blooming. Oh, there's so much to do. We'll need to make a dress, plan the reception, send invitations." "Actually," Katherine said quietly, and everyone turned to listen because she spoke so rarely, "we'd like something simple, small, just family and close friends." Eliza opened her mouth to protest, then looked at her daughter's face and reconsidered. "Simple can be lovely too," she said finally. "We'll make it beautiful and intimate." The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in April. That gave Mason 3 months to make improvements to the property and start building their house. He threw himself into the work with fierce determination, often laboring from dawn until well past dark. Joseph and Catherine's brothers helped when they could, and slowly but surely, a home began to take shape. It was a modest house by most standards, but it was solidly built with good timber and careful craftsmanship. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a big window that let in the morning light, a parlor with a fireplace, and a small room that Mason designated as Catherine's library. He built shelves into the walls himself, measuring carefully to make them level and strong. Katherine came to see the progress every few days, and each time she marveled at what Mason had accomplished. "It's perfect," she told him, standing in the empty parlor and imagining their future there. "It's not finished yet," Mason said. "Still needs a proper porch, and I want to build a barn before winter comes around again." "It's still perfect," Katherine insisted. She walked to the window and looked out at the land stretching toward the creek. "I can already see us here, reading by the fire in the winter, having coffee on the porch in summer, growing old together." Mason came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on top of her head. "That's exactly what I see too." In town, people had plenty to say about the upcoming wedding. Some were happy for Katherine, glad she'd found someone who appreciated her. Others were skeptical, predicting that Mason would grow tired of her silence, that he'd come to resent having a wife who couldn't entertain properly or make witty conversation at social gatherings. Mary Henderson, whose daughter had married the previous summer, was particularly vocal in her doubts. "That poor man," she said to anyone who would listen. "He doesn't realize what he's getting into. A wife needs to be a companion, someone who can brighten a home with chatter and laughter. What kind of life will he have, coming home to silence every day?" Word of these comments got back to Katherine through her mother, who reluctantly shared what was being said. Katherine tried not to let it bother her, but Mason could see the hurt in her eyes. "What people think doesn't matter," he told her firmly. They were sitting together on the fence rail at the Garrison ranch, watching the sun set. "The only opinions that matter are yours and mine." "But what if they're right?" Katherine said quietly. "What if you do get tired of my silence someday?" Mason turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "Listen to me, Katherine. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. Your silence is my peace. When I'm with you, I feel calm in a way I've never felt with anyone else. You don't chatter to fill empty air. When you speak, it means something. When you're quiet, it's not because you have nothing to say. It's because you're thinking, observing, being present in the moment. That's rare and precious. You really mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. I don't want you to change. I don't want you to try to be louder or more talkative. I love you exactly as you are. Your quietness isn't a flaw to tolerate. It's one of the things I love most about you." Katherine blinked back tears. "No one has ever understood that before." "Then everyone else is missing out on seeing who you really are," Mason said. "Their loss is my gain." She kissed him then, putting all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they pulled apart, she said, "I'm going to make you so happy, Mason Turner." "You already do," he replied. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Eliza and Katherine worked on the wedding dress, simple white cotton with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs. Katherine's sisters-in-law helped prepare food for the reception. Mason finished the house and started on the barn, wanting to have at least the basic structure completed before the wedding. A week before the ceremony, a stranger rode into San Angelo asking questions about Mason Turner. Sheriff Palmer, always cautious about strangers with too much interest in specific people, approached the man at the saloon. "I'm Sheriff Palmer. Heard you were asking about one of our citizens." The stranger was a hard-looking man in his 40s, with cold eyes and a scar across his jaw. "Name is Garrett Mills. I'm a bounty hunter out of Kansas. Turner killed my partner up in Abilene a few years back." "Jake Farley was your partner?" Palmer asked, his hand resting casually near his gun. "That's right. We worked together sometimes, splitting bounties." "I heard Turner brought him in dead, claimed it was self-defense." "It was self-defense," Palmer said firmly. "Farley had just tried to kill a young woman here in San Angelo. Turner tracked him down and brought him to justice. There was a bounty on Farley's head because he was wanted for robbery and murder." "That may be," Mills said, "but I still want to hear Turner's side of the story. Where can I find him?" Palmer didn't like the look in Mills's eyes, but he couldn't legally prevent the man from talking to Mason. "He works at the Garrison Ranch, about 3 miles south of town. But I'm warning you now, if you're planning trouble, I won't have it in my jurisdiction." "No trouble, Sheriff. Just want to have a conversation." Mills rode out to the Garrison Ranch that afternoon. Mason was working on the barn when he saw the rider approaching. Something about the man's bearing set off warning bells, and Mason's hand moved instinctively closer to the gun he wore while working. "Mason Turner," Mills called out. "That's right. What can I do for you?" Mills dismounted, keeping his hands visible. "Name is Garrett Mills. I want to talk to you about Jake Farley." Mason's expression didn't change, but he shifted his stance slightly. "Farley's dead. Has been for almost 6 months now. I know. You're the one who killed him." "I'm the one who defended myself when he drew on me," Mason corrected. "There's a difference." "Maybe," Mills said. "Or maybe you murdered him in cold blood to collect the bounty. Farley told me once that he knew you from way back, that you two had bad blood." "Farley was a liar," Mason said flatly. "I never met him before I started tracking him, and I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to bring him in alive so he could face justice for the people he'd hurt. He made a different choice." Mills studied Mason's face, looking for signs of deception. "The bounty on Farley was only $50. Seems like a lot of trouble for not much money." "It wasn't about the money," Mason said. "He shot at an innocent woman, could have killed her. Men like that need to be stopped. Real noble of you. Think what you want. I've got nothing to hide." "The sheriff investigated, ruled it a clean shooting. That's the end of it." "Maybe not," Mills said quietly. "I've been asking around, found out you're getting married soon. Nice property you bought. Pretty fiancé. Be a shame if something happened to mess all that up." Mason's eyes went hard as flint. "If that's a threat, you should know I don't respond well to threats." "Not a threat, just an observation." Mills climbed back onto his horse. "I'll be around San Angelo for a few days, might keep asking questions, see what else I can find out about you." He rode off, leaving Mason standing there with a cold feeling in his gut. This was trouble, the kind that could put Katherine and her family in danger. He needed to deal with it, and quickly. Mason went straight to Sheriff Palmer and told him about the conversation. Palmer listened with a deepening frown. "Mills has a reputation," the sheriff said. "He's technically legal, works as a bounty hunter, but he's not above bending the law when it suits him. I don't trust him." "Is there anything we can do?" "Not unless he breaks the law. But I'll keep an eye on him, make sure he knows he's being watched." Palmer looked at Mason seriously. "You sure there's nothing in your past that could come back to bite you?" "I've done things I'm not proud of," Mason admitted. "Rode with some rough men before I decided to go straight. But I never killed anyone who didn't draw on me first, and I never stole from anyone who couldn't afford the loss. I'm not a saint, Sheriff, but I'm not a criminal either." "That's good enough for me," Palmer said. "But Mills is looking for something he can use against you. Be careful." Over the next few days, Mills made himself visible around San Angelo, talking to people, asking questions about Mason. Most people had nothing but good things to say. Mason was known as a hard worker, honest and reliable, but Mills kept digging, and eventually he found someone willing to talk. Old Pete Harrison, a drunk who spent most of his time at the saloon, remembered seeing Mason in a town up north about 4 years ago. "He was with the Dalton gang," Pete said, eager to trade information for whiskey money. "I'd swear to it." Saw him ride out with them after they robbed the bank in Coleman. It was a lie, but Mills didn't care about truth. He cared about leverage. He took this information straight to the Garrison ranch, arriving just as the family was sitting down to Sunday dinner. Mason and Katherine were both there, along with her parents and brothers. Mills knocked on the door, and when Joseph answered, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I've got some information about Mason Turner that you folks might want to know about before you let him marry your daughter." Joseph's face darkened. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it to me and the sheriff. This is family time." "It's all right," Mason said, standing. He looked at Katherine, saw the worry in her eyes, and tried to give her a reassuring look. "Let's hear what Mr. Mills has to say." They stepped outside onto the porch. Mills was smiling, enjoying his moment of power. "I found someone who can place you with the Dalton gang 4 years ago. Said you were there when they robbed the bank in Coleman." "That's a lie," Mason said calmly. 4 years ago, I was working a cattle drive from San Antonio to Dodge City. I was never near Coleman, and I never rode with any gang. You got proof of that? I can get it. The ranch owner I worked for keeps records, and there were a dozen other cowboys on that drive who can verify where I was." "Maybe," Mills said. "Or maybe you're lying. Maybe you've been playing these good people for fools, pretending to be an honest cowboy when you're really a thief and a killer." Katherine appeared in the doorway. "That's not true," she said quietly but firmly. "Mason is a good man." "You're his fiancée," Mills said dismissively. "Of course you'd defend him." "I defend him because I know him," Katherine said, stepping out onto the porch. "He's honest and kind and honorable. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong." Mills laughed. "Lady, you're too quiet and simple to know what kind of man you're really dealing with." That was a mistake. Mason moved before anyone could blink, getting between Mills and Katherine. "You can say whatever you want about me," he said in a voice cold as winter steel, "but you will not insult her. Apologize, now." Mills's hand moved toward his gun, but Joseph had appeared with his rifle. "I think you should leave," Joseph said, "and don't come back." "This isn't over," Mills said, but he was backing toward his horse. "I'll prove what Turner really is." After he rode off, Mason turned to Katherine. "I'm sorry, I never wanted to bring trouble to your family." "You didn't bring trouble," Joseph said. "That man did, and we'll deal with him together." Katherine took Mason's hand. "I meant what I said. I know who you are. Nothing he says will change that." The next day, Mason rode to the nearest telegraph office and sent a wire to the ranch owner he'd worked for 4 years ago, asking for written confirmation of his employment during the time Mills claimed he was with the Dalton gang. He also talked to several people in San Angelo who could verify his whereabouts and character. Sheriff Palmer was already investigating Mills, and what he found wasn't encouraging. Garrett Mills had a history of fabricating evidence to collect bounties, of pressuring innocent people to see if they'd pay him to go away. He was dangerous not because he was a fighter, but because he was willing to lie and manipulate. "He's trying to shake you down," Palmer told Mason. "He figures if he makes enough noise, you'll pay him to leave and keep quiet." "I'm not paying him anything," Mason said. "Good, but that means he's going to escalate. Be careful." The warning proved prescient. 2 days later, Mason's barn caught fire. He was at the main house having dinner with the Garrisons when they saw the orange glow against the night sky. By the time they got there, the barn was fully engulfed, the flames leaping high into the darkness. There was nothing to be done but watch it burn and make sure the fire didn't spread to the house or the grass. Katherine stood beside Mason, holding his hand as he watched months of work go up in smoke. "We'll rebuild it," she said quietly. "It's just wood and nails. We're both safe, and that's what matters." Mason pulled her close, his jaw tight with anger and frustration. "Mills did this, I know he did." "Can you prove it?" Joseph asked. "No, but I know." The next morning, Sheriff Palmer came out to investigate. He found tracks leading away from the burned barn, headed east toward town. The tracks suggested someone had waited and watched, making sure the fire caught well before riding off. "I'll bring Mills in for questioning," Palmer said, "but without proof, I can't hold him." Mills, of course, had an alibi. He'd been at the saloon all evening, several people saw him there. But Mason noticed the satisfied look in the man's eyes when he denied any involvement. He'd either set the fire himself earlier and established his alibi afterward, or he'd hired someone else to do it. The wedding was now only 3 days away, and Mason was faced with a difficult decision. He could postpone until he dealt with Mills, or he could proceed as planned and refuse to let the man's threats control his life. Katherine made the choice for him. "We're getting married on Saturday," she said firmly. "We're not letting him win by making us afraid." "If he's willing to burn a barn, he might do worse," Mason said. "Then we'll be careful, but we won't let him steal our happiness." Mason looked at this quiet woman who everyone had said was too timid to be a wife, and he saw a core of steel beneath her gentleness. "All right," he said. "Saturday it is." The day before the wedding, Mason was in town buying supplies when he ran into Mills on the street. The bounty hunter had clearly been drinking, and he was in a talkative mood. "Heard you're still planning to get married," Mills said. "Brave man, or maybe just stupid." "What do you want, Mills?" Mason asked wearily. "Same thing I've always wanted, justice for my partner." "Your partner was a murderer and a thief. He got exactly what he deserved." Mills stepped closer, and Mason could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Here's what I think happened. I think you and Farley knew each other. I think you had a personal grudge, and when you heard there was a bounty on him, you saw your chance. You tracked him down and killed him in cold blood, not because he drew on you, but because you wanted him dead. Think whatever you want. It won't make it true. Maybe I'll share my theory with your bride. See if she still wants to marry a killer." Mason's control finally snapped. He grabbed Mills by the shirt front and slammed him against the wall of the general store. "Listen to me very carefully. Katherine knows exactly who I am. She knows every mistake I've made, every dark corner of my past, and she loves me anyway. You can't touch that." "Get your hands off me," Mills sputtered. "I'm only going to say this once. Leave San Angelo. Leave me and my family alone. If you don't, I promise you'll regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Sheriff Palmer came running, drawn by the commotion. "Let him go, Mason." Mason released Mills and stepped back, his hands raised. "He started it." "I don't care who started it. I'm ending it." Palmer turned to Mills. "I've been doing some research on you, Mr. Mills. Turns out there's a warrant for your arrest up in Kansas. Something about falsifying evidence to collect a bounty." Now, I can either wire the authorities up there and have you arrested, or you can get on your horse and leave San Angelo. Your choice." Mills's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Try me," Palmer said coldly. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mills straightened his shirt and said, "Fine. This town isn't worth my time anyway." He looked at Mason. "But this isn't over." "Yes, it is," Mason said. "You just don't know it yet." Mills rode out of town that afternoon, and Sheriff Palmer made sure he actually left by following him to the county line. When the sheriff returned, he found Mason waiting at his office. "Thank you," Mason said. "I know you bent the rules for me." Palmer shrugged. "There really is a warrant for Mills in Kansas. I just haven't officially received notification yet. Thought I'd give him a chance to turn himself in before I had to arrest him." "You think he'll come back?" Men like Mills are bullies. They move on when they meet real resistance. You stood up to him, and now he knows he can't shake you down. My guess is he'll find easier prey somewhere else." Mason hoped the sheriff was right. That night, he told Katherine everything, including his confrontation with Mills and the man's departure from town. "You think it's really over?" she asked. "I think so. But if it's not, if he comes back, I'll deal with it. I won't let anyone hurt you or threaten our future." Katherine cupped his face in her hands. "We'll deal with it together. That's what marriage means. We're partners." "Partners," Mason agreed, kissing her softly. "I like the sound of that." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect spring mornings in Texas when the air is soft and the wildflowers are blooming everywhere you look. Katherine woke early, too excited to sleep, and watched the sunrise from her bedroom window. This was the last morning she'd wake up in this room in her childhood home. Tomorrow morning, she'd wake up as Mason's wife, in their own house, beginning their new life together. The ceremony was held at the small church in San Angelo, with just family and close friends in attendance. Katherine wore her simple white dress, her dark hair braided with wildflowers woven through it. She carried a bouquet of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush that she'd picked herself that morning. When she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw Mason waiting for her at the altar, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. He looked handsome in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes locked on her face with such love and joy that she felt tears prick her eyes. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. When the preacher asked if they had vows they wanted to share, Mason spoke first. "Katherine, people said you were too quiet to be a wife. They were wrong about everything except the quiet part. You are quiet, and I love that about you. Your silence is my peace. In a world that's too loud and too harsh, you're like still water, clear and deep. You make me want to be better, to be worthy of the love you give me. I promise to spend my life protecting your gentle spirit, honoring your quiet strength, and loving every part of you, spoken and unspoken." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Katherine took a deep breath and spoke her own vows, her voice soft but steady. "Mason, you're the first person who ever made me feel like I didn't need to change to be loved. You see me, really see me, not as I should be, but as I am. You taught me that silence can be a language all its own, and that peace is something worth building a life on. I promise to be your partner, your peace, your home. I promise to love you with everything I am, in word and in silence, for all the days of my life." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mason kissed Katherine with such tenderness that it felt like a prayer. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the Garrison Ranch, with tables set up under the oak trees and food spread out in abundance. There was music and dancing, laughter and celebration. Katherine, who usually hated being the center of attention, found that she didn't mind it so much when Mason was beside her, his hand holding hers, his presence steady and reassuring. Late in the afternoon, they slipped away from the party and rode to their own property, their new home. Mason carried Katherine over the threshold, both of them laughing, giddy with happiness and the reality that they were finally married, finally beginning the life they'd dreamed about. Inside, the house was ready for them. Katherine's mother and sisters-in-law had come earlier in the week to help set up the kitchen and bedroom, to make sure the house felt like a home. There were curtains on the windows, rugs on the floors, a quilt on the bed that Eliza had made herself. Mason and Katherine stood in the parlor, looking around at their home, and Katherine felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "It's really ours," she whispered. "It's really ours," Mason confirmed. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head the way he liked to do. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Katherine said. "Are you?" "More than I can put into words," Mason said, "which is saying something since I'm not good with words to begin with." Katherine laughed and tilted her face up to kiss him. "You're better with words than you think. Your vows made me cry. Good tears, I hope. The best tears." They stood there together in the golden afternoon light, two quiet souls who had found each other against the odds, who had built something real and lasting out of understanding and respect and love. Outside, the Texas wind rustled through the oak trees and carried the scent of wildflowers. Inside, Mason and Katherine Turner began their life together in peaceful, perfect silence. The first year of marriage brought both challenges and joys. The barn needed to be rebuilt after the fire, which took most of the summer. Mason worked long hours, determined to have it finished before winter. Katherine helped when she could, but she also had her hands full establishing the household, planting a garden and tending to the small herd of cattle they'd started with. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, their days busy with work but their evenings peaceful. They'd sit together on the porch after supper, watching the stars come out, sharing the quiet observations that made up their particular kind of conversation. "The creek is running lower than it should," Katherine might say. "I noticed that too. Probably need to dig out the channel a bit, clear the debris. The hen with the brown spots is broody. We should let her sit on a clutch of eggs. Good idea. We could use more chickens." To an outsider, these exchanges might have seemed mundane, hardly worth mentioning. But to Mason and Katherine, they were the building blocks of a shared life, evidence of partnership and care. In November, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She told Mason on a cold evening as they were getting ready for bed. He'd been reading one of the books from her growing library, lips moving slightly as he worked through the words. He'd asked her to teach him to read better, and she'd been patiently working with him for months. "Mason," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately attentive to the tone in her voice. "What is it?" "We're going to have a baby. Next summer, I think." For a moment, Mason just stared at her, the book forgotten in his hands. Then he set it aside carefully and crossed to where she sat at the dressing table. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." A smile spread across his face, slow and wondering. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "I'm beyond happy," Mason said. He laid his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "When I was drifting, before I found you, I never let myself think about having a family. It seemed like something for other people, not for someone like me. And now look at us. A home, a ranch, and now a baby on the way." Katherine covered his hand with hers. "What do you hope for? A boy or a girl?" "I don't care as long as the baby is healthy and you're safe," Mason said. "Though I admit, the thought of a little girl with your eyes and your quiet wisdom sounds pretty wonderful." "Or a boy with your strength and your kind heart," Katherine countered. They sat together in the lamplight, planning and dreaming, talking about the future in a way they rarely did. They decided they'd need to add another room to the house eventually, maybe two if they were blessed with more children. Mason started working on a cradle in his spare time, carving it carefully from cedar wood. Catherine's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. She continued to work as long as she could, tending her garden and her chickens, helping Mason with the lighter ranch chores. Her mother visited often, bringing supplies and advice, fussing over her youngest daughter with a tenderness that Katherine appreciated even when it was overwhelming. "You're carrying high," Eliza said one afternoon, studying Catherine's growing belly. "That means it's a girl." "That's just an old wives' tale, Mother. Old wives know things," Eliza said with a smile. "Mark my words, you're having a daughter." But when the baby came in early July of 1880, after a long but uncomplicated labor, it was a boy. Mason was there for the birth, holding Catherine's hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. When the midwife placed the squalling infant in Catherine's arms, both parents wept with joy. "He's perfect," Katherine breathed, touching the baby's tiny fingers, his soft, dark hair. "He looks like you," Mason said. "He has your nose. Poor kid." Katherine laughed weakly, exhausted but happier than she'd ever been. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names over the winter but hadn't settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Mason said, "What about Matthew? It means gift of God, and that's what he is." "Matthew Turner," Katherine said, testing the name. "I like it. Matthew it is." Little Matthew was a quiet baby which amused everyone who knew his parents. "Like father, like mother, like son," Joseph said, cradling his first grandson. "This child probably won't say his first word until he's good and ready." As it turned out, Matthew was indeed a quiet child, but he was also observant and clever. He learned to walk early, toddling around the ranch exploring everything with curious dark eyes. Katherine would find him sitting perfectly still, watching ants march across the porch or clouds drift across the sky. Mason taught him the names of animals and plants, showed him how to be gentle with the horses, how to read the weather and the wind. When Matthew was 2 years old, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was sick in the mornings and tired all the time. Mason worried constantly, taking on more of the household chores, making sure Katherine rested as much as possible. Their daughter was born in March of 1883, a healthy baby girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's determined chin. They named her Mary after Mason's mother. With 2 young children, the house felt full in the best possible way. Mason added 2 more rooms, creating proper bedrooms for the children. Catherine's library stayed small, but it was her sanctuary, the place she'd retreat to when she needed quiet time to think and read. The ranch prospered. Mason had a gift for training horses, and word spread. People came from all over Tom Green County to have him work with their animals. Katherine managed the household and took care of the children, but she also kept meticulous records of the ranch's finances, managed their breeding program for the cattle, and made decisions about what crops to plant and when. They were partners in every sense of the word, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Mason was better with his hands, with physical labor and animal training. Katherine had a head for numbers and planning, for seeing patterns and making connections. When Matthew started asking questions about everything, it was Katherine who patiently explained how things worked, who taught him to read and do arithmetic. When Mary showed an early talent for riding, it was Mason who taught her, who praised her fearlessness while also teaching her to respect the animals. The children grew up understanding that their mother's quietness was not a weakness, but a different way of being in the world. They learned that silence could be comfortable, that you didn't always need words to communicate love or understanding. They also learned to speak up when they had something important to say, to make their words count. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons, of work and rest, of challenges met and overcome. Mason's hair started to show gray at the temples. Catherine's face gained fine lines around her eyes from smiling and squinting in the Texas sun. Their children grew tall and strong. When Matthew was 12 and Mary was 9, a severe drought hit the region. For months, rain refused to fall. The creek on their property slowed to a trickle and then dried up entirely. Cattle prices plummeted as everyone tried to sell off stock they couldn't feed or water. Many small ranchers went under, forced to sell their land to bigger operations. Mason and Katherine faced the possibility of losing everything they'd built. They sat up late into the night, going over their finances, trying to figure out how to survive until the drought broke. "We could sell half the herd," Mason said. "Take the loss now before they get any thinner." "And if the drought lasts another year," Katherine asked, "we'll have no breeding stock left to rebuild with. What else can we do?" Katherine studied the ledger in front of her, her mind working through possibilities. "We have savings. Not much, but enough to buy feed for a reduced herd if we're careful, and your horse training brings in steady money. If we sell enough of the cattle to get through this year, keep only our best breeding stock, we might make it. It's a risk." "Everything is a risk," Katherine said, "but giving up isn't an option. We've worked too hard to build this place." They made the decision to stay and fight. Mason sold horses to anyone who would buy, taking on extra training jobs even when it meant working from dawn past dark. Katherine planted a drought-resistant garden, found ways to stretch every penny, made sure nothing went to waste. Matthew and Mary helped however they could. Matthew took on adult responsibilities, helping his father with the horses and cattle. Mary tended the garden with her mother, learned to make soap and candles to save money, helped with cooking and cleaning. It was the hardest year of their marriage, full of worry and exhaustion. But it also brought them closer together, reminded them of what they were capable of when they worked as a team. The drought finally broke in the fall, with storms rolling in from the Gulf that turned the dry creek bed into a rushing torrent overnight. Mason and Katherine stood on their porch watching the rain pour down, and they held each other and cried with relief. "We made it," Katherine said. "We did," Mason agreed. "Because of you, your planning, your strength. I couldn't have done this without you." "We did it together," Katherine corrected. "That's how we've always done things." The ranch recovered gradually over the following years. They rebuilt their herd carefully, focusing on quality over quantity. Mason's reputation as a horse trainer continued to grow, and eventually they were able to add to their property, buying another 80 acres from a neighbor who was retiring. By the time Matthew turned 18 in 1896, the ranch was thriving. He'd grown into a serious young man, thoughtful like his mother, strong like his father. He wanted to study animal husbandry at the agricultural college in College Station, and his parents encouraged him to go, even though it meant losing his help on the ranch. "Education is important," Katherine told him. "Your father and I will manage, we always have." Mary, now 15, was determined to stay and help run the ranch. She had her father's way with horses and her mother's head for business. "I don't want to go anywhere else," she said. "This is home. This is where I belong." As Mason and Katherine's children grew into adults and started making their own paths, the couple found themselves with more time alone together. They still worked hard, but the desperate struggle of the early years was past. They could afford to hire help when they needed it, could take an occasional day off to ride out to their favorite spot by the creek and just be together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Katherine said, "Do you ever think about what people said, back when we were courting? About you being too quiet to be a wife?" Mason asked. He pulled her closer against his side. "Sometimes. Usually when I'm thinking about how wrong they were. Mrs. Henderson told my mother just last week that she's surprised our marriage lasted," Katherine said. "She said she was sure you'd grow bored with me," Mason snorted. "Mary Henderson is a fool, always has been. I told Mother to tell her that we're still very much in love and that silence is underrated." "What did your mother say?" She laughed. "She told me she's glad she was wrong about you being unsuitable. She said you've been the perfect husband for me." "That's quite an admission from Eliza," Mason said. "She wasn't my biggest fan at first. She loves you now. Everyone can see how happy we are." Mason turned Katherine's face toward his and kissed her softly. "I am happy, so damn happy. Every single day I wake up grateful that I rode into San Angelo and found you." "I'm grateful too," Katherine said, "for all of it, the struggles and the triumphs. The quiet mornings and the busy afternoons. The life we've built together." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, the way they'd done thousands of times over the years. Neither felt the need to fill the air with words. Their silence was still their peace, their shared language, the foundation of everything they'd created together. Matthew graduated from college and came home with plans to improve the ranch's breeding program. He brought a wife with him, a lovely young woman named Sarah who was quiet in her own way, who fit into the Turner family like she'd always been part of it. Mary eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, a boisterous young man named Jack who adored her strength and competence. They took over part of the Turner property, building their own house a mile from Mason and Katherine's, raising their own children while working the land together. As Mason and Katherine grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibility to their children. But they stayed active, stayed involved, stayed deeply in love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party, inviting everyone from San Angelo and the surrounding ranches. Mason stood up to give a toast, and the room fell silent to hear him speak. He looked around at all the faces, people who'd known them for decades, who'd watched their love story unfold. 25 years ago," he said, "I married the quietest woman in San Angelo. People said she was too quiet to be a wife. They said a man needed a woman who could fill a home with talk and laughter. They were wrong." He turned to look at Katherine, his eyes full of love. "My wife has filled our home with something better than noise. She's filled it with peace, with thoughtfulness, with a kind of deep contentment that comes from really knowing and being known by another person. Her silence has been my greatest comfort, my truest home." He raised his glass. "To Katherine, to 25 years of the best kind of quiet. To a love that doesn't need words to be understood. To my partner, my peace, my heart." Katherine stood up and kissed him while the room erupted in applause and cheers. Then, surprising everyone including herself, she spoke. "Mason Turner is a man of few words," she said, her quiet voice somehow carrying through the room. "So when he speaks, I listen. And he's right. Our love has always been quiet, but it's also been deep and true and strong enough to weather every storm. He saw me when others looked past me. He heard me when others thought I had nothing to say. He loved the real me, not the person others thought I should be. That's the greatest gift anyone can give. So here's to Mason, to our children, to our family and friends, and to another 25 years of peaceful, perfect love." They clinked glasses and kissed again, and their children and grandchildren gathered around them, celebrating the love story that had proved everyone wrong, that had shown an entire town that sometimes the quietest voices speak the deepest truths. Mason and Katherine Turner lived well into their 70s, surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching the ranch continue to prosper under the next generation's care. They spent their final years much as they'd spent their first years together, sitting side by side, communicating as much in silence as in words. Two souls perfectly matched. When Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 76, Katherine held his hand and whispered, "Your silence is my peace." And when Katherine followed him 2 years later, her children found a letter she'd written, to be read at her funeral. The letter was characteristically brief. It said, "I lived a quiet life and I loved a quiet man, and together we built something loud enough to echo through generations. Don't mourn that I spoke few words. I said everything that mattered to the person who mattered most. That's all anyone really needs." The Turner Ranch still operates today, passed down through the family, a testament to what two quiet people built together in the wild heart of Texas. And sometimes, on still evenings when the wind is just right, you can almost feel their presence in the peaceful silence. Two souls still together, still at peace, proving for eternity that the quietest love can be the strongest love of all.